Fun fact about me, back when I was in high school, UPenn and Wharton was my dream school, but sadly I didn't get in. And then I applied for my MBA and I did get in, and my mom was especially ecstatic because she actually named me after Benjamin Franklin, who founded UPenn. And so in today's video, I want to go over my stats and profile, the essays and what I wrote about, and provide some tips along the way so that in case you're applying for Wharton or any other MBA application, it can be helpful for your process. All right, so first up, let's go into my stats and profile, and I'll be going into each component from what I consider to be the most important to least important. Starting off with my professional experience, after graduating from UC Berkeley in 2015, I worked at JP Morgan as an investment banking analyst for a few years in the San Francisco healthcare group. And then I quit in 2018, backpacked and traveled for around 6 months and started my own company called Aesthetic Studios, which was kind of trying to be the Nike for creatives. And so I think my background was a little bit odd in the sense that I did have some blue chip professional experience that was quote unquote more normal in banking. And then I had this clothing brand, which kind of was like a huge left turn. And I'll discuss later on in my essays how I kind of merged all of this together. Second, in regards to my academics, at Berkeley, I majored in business administration and minored in creative writing. I had a 3.6 GPA and got a 750 on the GMAT. And I think the GPA is just about average for Wharton applicants. And then my GMAT was a little above average. And I would say that if your GPA is a little bit on the lower side or average side, then work really hard on the GMAT to make sure that you get a good score, because that'll balance out a lower GPA. Then for my letters of recommendation, most business schools require 2, and I got 1 from my former associate who supervised a lot of my work when I was an analyst at JP Morgan. And for that letter, I provided guidance to focus more on my leadership qualities and my personality, because a lot of times bankers can seem or come off as people who are just soulless and only care about money. So that's why I provided guidance more about who I was as a person. And then for my second letter, my co-founder for my fashion brand wrote it. And for that one, I provided guidance more to focus on my grit, just because when you are working in entrepreneurship or on a company, there's so many daily challenges and there's so much uncertainty, and you have to have a lot of grit in order to succeed. And so that's what that letter focused on. Next, for my extracurriculars, my most important one was Subconscious, which was a mental health nonprofit that I started with a group of friends many years ago because it was an issue that was very important to me. I was also the UC Berkeley JP Morgan recruiting captain for 2 years and then the president of 2 undergrad clubs. And I would say extracurriculars are a good bonus, but are not a huge part of your application overall. So don't worry too much if you don't have a lot of these. The last part of my profile were my awards, and my most important one was just being a top-rated analyst across all analysts in the healthcare group across North America. And then the second was a JP Morgan Campus Contributor Award for leading recruiting. And then I also had some college leadership type awards, and similar to your extracurriculars, awards again are not incredibly important, so don't worry too much about these either. So those were my stats and profile, and I would say my most important piece of advice is to really think of your entire application as a puzzle piece where you have different parts of the application showing different sides of who you are, because it is a very holistic process where the admissions committee is going to read through everything when they look at your application. So you don't want to have your essays, resume, and letters of recommendation all kind of saying the same thing about you. And so really keep that in mind as you build out your application. Now, if you're watching this video because you're interested in applying to business school, you're definitely going to want to check out the new GMAT Focus Edition, which is shorter, more flexible, and has more features compared to the old GMAT. Going over some key changes, the new GMAT Focus is considerably shorter at 2 hours and 15 minutes instead of being over 3 hours long. The exam also now only has 3 sections that are equally weighted towards your final score: quant, verbal, and data insights, and these can be taken in any order. So this means that the analytical writing assessment has been dropped, along with sentence correction in verbal and most of geometry for quant. The GMAT has been the flagship business school exam for over 65 years, and GMAT recently upgraded the exam in order to better reflect what business schools look for in applicants and also to just enhance the test-taking experience. Most business schools heavily weight the GMAT when deciding on scholarship offers, and so it's important to do well. And if you want to take the GMAT Focus Edition, I'll leave a link to all of this down, and you can check it out down in my description below. All right, with that said, let me talk about my first essay for Wharton, and the prompt for this essay is, what do you hope to professionally gain from the Wharton MBA? So this essay is all about your story and also the research you've done into Wharton to make them feel like the school is your number one choice. And I want to start off kind of giving you insight about my essay by reading off my first paragraph that I wrote that really sets the stage for the rest of the essay. I've always felt like I've lived in two separate worlds, the business one and the creative one. At college, I prioritized the former, majoring in business and minoring in creative writing. Upon graduation, I worked as an investment banking analyst at JP Morgan, where numbers increasingly became my words. But things began to change when my family member was suddenly diagnosed with ALS. After months of reflection, I decided to quit and pursue my childhood dream of entrepreneurship by co-founding Aesthetic Studios, a fashion brand aiming to represent the arts as Nike does for sports. For the first time, my two worlds of business and the arts combined into one. And so as I mentioned earlier on in the video, my professional profile was a little bit odd because I worked in banking and then I started a fashion brand. No one does that, right? And so I try to connect everything by just talking about my interest in the arts, which really started from my love for English back in 9th grade. And then that was also a really important source of inspiration for when I started the fashion brand as well. And so I would say after that, I tried to connect everything by focusing on my goals, which was also related. So my short run goal was to create a tech company that used machine learning to kind of help artists find new job opportunities, because there's always this kind of stereotype of the starving artist, right? So I wanted to kind of help solve that problem. And in the long run, I wanted to found my own VC company that invests in the intersection of technology and creativity. My last two paragraphs focused on what Wharton would give me. And so I talked about how I would intend to major in business analytics, which I ended up not doing. And then the different classes I would want to take. And then how I wanted to build an alumni network, which I found was something I really needed when I was doing my entrepreneurship work. And I felt like I didn't have the connections that I needed. And also lastly, I talked about how I wanted to build an East Coast network, given that I was from the West Coast and born and raised in California my whole life. So I can never really know what the admissions committee thought when they read this essay, but I think the reason that it did well was because I had a really deep-rooted interest in the arts, and I was able to tie that with my professional profile, which, as I said, kind of took a bit of a left turn after banking, and then it connected to my future goals. So everything was kind of connected by a thread, and I focused a lot on goals that were a little bit lofty, but still within the realm of possibility given my background. So that's what I think worked for this essay. Having that common thread is my biggest tip when answering essay prompts that are focused on what is your story and why an MBA. And as a quick plug, I'm building out my own how to get into MBA course that'll be launching in the next few weeks. And if you're interested, you can sign up using my link down in the description below and get a 50% discount for signing up early. With that said, let's move on to the second essay, whose prompt is, how do you plan to make meaningful and specific contributions to the Wharton community? For this essay, I focused on mental health, and I first started off the essay by talking about how a person close to me struggled a lot with mental health issues and how I kind of needed to help them. And then I talked about how I started these weekly conversations in my business fraternity in college, talking about highs and lows. And this was a little bit unusual because a lot of times when you're in a professional club in school, you're really just focused on recruiting. So I talked about how I initiated more of these raw, meaningful conversations. And then I talked about how I started a nonprofit called Subconscious, which was a mental health nonprofit focused on lowering the stigma surrounding behavioral health issues. I then talked about at Wharton how I would want to start a modern wellness club, and then how I would bring in speakers to talk about mental health issues. And let me read you guys an excerpt from my last paragraph of how I kind of concluded the essay. I know my peers will be driven, tough, and won't always need a helping hand. However, having worked in fast-paced environments with ambitious colleagues, I know how easy it is to forget the why behind hard work, feel lost, and thereby struggle. Even when just one person's mental health improves, there are an endless number of positive ripple effects that can occur in an entire community. I believe this would be particularly true at Wharton, given its unmatched focus on collaboration, which is why I hope my mental health efforts will be one of my most meaningful contributions. So that was my second essay, and I think the reason this one did well was because I had a clearly really deep history with what I discussed, and I had evidence to back it up, even when it was like a small thing with the weekly conversations in my business fraternity, all the way to the nonprofit that I started. And so the advice that I have for you with essays that are focused on what is your contribution, or sometimes even when essays don't directly ask this question for MBA prompts, they still do sometimes want to know what kind of contributions are and how you'll uniquely add value to an MBA community. And I would really focus on those issues or things about you that you have a lot of evidence for and things that you really care about. If you want to read through my entire admitted application for Wharton and Columbia, you can purchase them at rareliquidcareers.com. And in the next screen, you're gonna see a video about my best MBA application tips in order for you to get into your dream school. So feel free to check that out if you're interested. With that said, thank you all so much for watching. Hope to catch you guys in the next video. Thanks so much, guys, and peace out.